online TOEFL speaking tutorial videos. This one is for question 6. So congratulations on making it this far, because question 6, good news, is the last question. I hope you've had time to watch my other videos and that you've been practicing very hard to prepare for the last question. Now, let's talk a little bit about question 6. Question 6 is a summary question. So that means that there's no reading to do here. You have a lecture that you listen to that's about 90 seconds, could be a little longer, could be a little shorter, but it will fall somewhere close to 90 seconds. It could be about any academic topic. It could be about art, it could be about marketing, biology, astronomy, oceanography, but it will be the level of a first-year college class, so it won't be super advanced. You do not need any outside knowledge of those topics, of any topic in fact. I do not recommend you use any outside knowledge because they only want you to repeat what you heard. If you use your outside knowledge, the ETS will ignore it, so just stick to what they say and summarizing it. Okay, the structure is you listen to the lecture, then you have 20 seconds to prepare, which isn't much time, but I'm going to talk about what you're going to do in that 20 seconds later. Then you have 60 seconds to speak. Now, the lecturer usually defines a concept in a very broad way, and then we'll give 2 examples that are more specific to illustrate this concept. But I really want to point out that's not the only structure this lecture could take. It could also be explaining an experiment, explaining a process, or providing instructions on how to do something, such as perhaps how to use the microscope. So as I mentioned before, this question 6 can take on a number of different forms, but today we're going to focus on the most common form that you usually will hear. The most common structure. This is the professor defines a broad topic in the beginning, gives a definition of something, or explains something. Then the professor will break this topic down into 2 subcategories. Then give very specific examples of those subcategories. So let's take a quick example. Perhaps the professor is talking about the human hand. So the professor will say, okay guys, everyone knows the human hand. There's 4 fingers and a thumb, but did you know that there are 2 ways the human hand can be used? One is for delicate tasks. For example, think of threading a needle. That's a very delicate task. Or think of sewing a button on your clothes. It's very delicate. But on the other hand, the human hand can be used for brute strength, such as fighting someone or lifting up a very heavy object. So those are the ways that we use the human hand. Now the example I just gave you was very short, and this is not the real length of a TOEFL question 6, but I just want to give you an idea of this structure. I'm going to give you a genuine example in a moment. So I want to give you some tips about how to take notes during this question. But remember, you have to practice taking notes a lot before you go into the test. You could practice taking notes while you're watching TV, you could practice taking notes while you're watching the news, anything you can do to improve this skill, because this is a very important skill for the TOEFL. Okay, so first of all, I want you to write down the topic and the definition that are given at the beginning. Okay? Then take note of the 2 subtopics and as much as you can about the 2 specific examples that they give. And this is very important. Do not try to write everything down. You will not be able to do that. You will get confused. The lecture will continue while you're still trying to write something down. So we need to only write down key words. The words you think that you're going to need to repeat to answer this question well. Don't write down articles like and the. Don't write down pronouns like he or she. And you should try to practice having an abbreviation system that you use In order to shorten words, you could use like EX for example, or the plus sign for and. There's lots of lists of abbreviations on the internet that you can get access to for free. Practice using these abbreviations when you take notes. Lastly, and this is very important, do not worry if you hear a word you don't know. That is very likely in the TOEFL speaking. What I want you to do is write the word down the best you can, the closest you can to how you think the professor pronounced it so that you can go ahead and pronounce it when it's time for you to give your response. Remember, the ETS shreds your notes. They don't look at your notes. So spelling's not important. So write it down the way that you are able to say it when it comes time to give your response. Okay, I want to introduce you to some useful phrases you can use when you answer this question. I don't recommend you already have a template structure in your head because I don't think that's flexible enough for question 6. Because as I mentioned, question 6 does not always follow the same format. So having a template might not work and might make you panic. Instead, I want you to practice using some of these useful phrases that I've written down on the board. First of all, you can say something like, the professor talks about blank, which he or she defines as. So for our hand example, the professor talks about the human hand, which she defines as a hand that has 4 fingers and a thumb. Okay? Secondly, the professor talks about 2 types of, or it could be kinds of, or ways to, or reasons for. Then, of course, you're going to say the professor gives specific example to illustrate this. So for my hand example, I would say the professor talks about 2 ways to use the human hand. The first is for delicate tasks. The professor gives a specific example to illustrate this. The example is sewing a button or threading a needle. The second way the human hand can be used is for brute force. The professor gives a specific example of fighting or lifting a heavy object with the hand. Now listen to a lecture in a biology class. Symbiosis is a close and often long-term interaction between 2 different biological species. In order to be considered symbiosis by scientists, the organisms must be different species and they must live together over a period of time. Today we are going to talk about 2 types of symbiosis, commensalism and mutualism. Commensalism is a type of relationship that is between 2 organisms where one organism benefits from the other but doesn't affect it. For example, look at the egret. The egret is a white bird with a yellow bill. It's found near cattle and other livestock. As livestock move through the fields, they stir up insects. The egret takes the opportunity to easily catch and eat any insects that fly through the air. The egret benefits because the livestock help them find their meals, but the livestock are not affected at all by the presence of the egrets. The second type of symbiosis is mutualism. Mutualism is when 2 organisms of different species exist in a relationship in which both get a benefit. Clownfish and sea anemones have a mutualistic relationship, each providing benefits to the other. The sea anemone protects the clownfish from predators by giving it a place to take refuge among its tentacles. In return, the clownfish defends the anemone from its predators by chasing them away. The clownfish's bright colors may even attract smaller fish to the sea anemone which it consumes. Thus, both organisms are given clear benefits in this relationship of mutualism. Question 6. The question will ask you to define the topic and then give the examples that the professor uses to illustrate, support, explain, or describe this topic. So for our sample, the question is, explain symbiosis and the examples the professor gives to illustrate this concept. Okay, on my board I've written some sample notes to show you what is important to write down during the listening part of this question. So let's take a look at my board here. I've written symbiosis because that's the topic and it's very important that I catch that. Rel''ship, that's my short form of relationship. B/tween for between. To org for organisms. Over time. And then I have two dashes to indicate my subtopics, right? My first subtopic, commensalism. One organism benefits, the other zero as in not affected. The EX, for example, the egret, the white bird, it eats insects stirred up by livestock, doesn't affect LS for livestock. Second, mutualism. Two organisms, both benefit. EX, for example, clownfish, anemone. Now, for anemone, I've switched to A because now I know that that's connected, and I started calling clownfish CF. Makes it a lot faster to take your notes if you do it this way. Clownfish, anemone. Anemone protects clownfish, gives it refuge. Clownfish protects anemone from predators. That's for my symbol for and, the plus sign with a circle around it, lures small fish. So you need to find abbreviations like I've given you here that you're comfortable with and that you can understand when it's time for you to give your response. Okay, now what to do during your 20-second preparation time. So you have your notes as written down here. I recommend that you take that 20 seconds to review them and think about how you're going to make these full sentences. And also, if there's extra information that you wrote down that you don't think will be helpful, that you don't think you will have time to say in 60 seconds, take this opportunity that you have to cross it out and just leave what you do want to say. The professor talks about symbiosis, which she defines as a relationship between two organisms over time. The professor talks about two types of symbiosis. The first type of symbiosis is commensalism. The professor gives a specific example to illustrate this. The egret, a white bird, and livestock. The egret eats insects that are stirred up by livestock, but this doesn't affect the livestock. The second type of symbiosis is mutualism. This is when two organisms both benefit from their interaction. The professor gives the specific example to illustrate this of the clownfish and the sea anemone. The anemone protects the clownfish by giving it refuge, and the clownfish protects the anemone from its predators and even lures small fish to the anemone. Okay, I'd like to review some of the key things that I went over today and talk about what not to do and what to do. So remember, do not use a template. Instead, know some useful phrases like the ones I gave you earlier. Second, do not repeat yourself to fill up the time. Third, do not use your own knowledge or add your opinion in this question. And last, do not try to write everything down that the professor says during the lecture. Okay, so what should you do? You should summarize the lecture, you should try to be as specific as possible, and make sure you repeat the key words even if you don't know what they mean. That's how you can get a good score. Also, remember to speak clearly, speak coherently, do not use a lot of pauses to fill up time, and try to make sure that native speakers can understand you before you go into the test. As always, thank you for watching and best of luck on your TOEFL. See you next time.